I mean, I like to think of it as kind of similar to what would happen if you drove a car and you always had one foot on the accelerator and one foot on the brake.
Mm,
It's like what we do is we want to accelerate and go forward, but we stick our foot in the brake first. And then
mm,
to go forward, that means we got to push the accelerator that much harder to get it moving.
yeah,
And you can imagine what that would do to your car. And if we're using ourselves in that particular way, you can imagine what's going to happen to the human body too.
yeah. And so we'll go with that. So this pressing the foot on the brake, what's doing this in the mind or the body? Like, what are we inhibiting? Are we inhibiting thoughts that we're imposing on the body? Are we imposing uh, reflexive habits in the body, and not they're not tied to the thoughts? Like, I would think that the reflex would be tied to a thought or
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think this is why thinking is so central
yeah.
to the technique. And it's why I think it was Dewey who, referred to the work as thinking in activity.
Hmm.
That's exactly what you're doing. You're thinking in activity. And so, Alexander used sort of the stimulus response terminology that was, common in his time, that obviously we inherited from William James and before James. So, he talked about inhibiting the stimulus that puts you wrong.
Hmm.
Now, the stimulus, I think, most of the time is a thought.
Yeah.
And this is consistent with, ideomotor theories.
Hmm.
Ideomotor theories more or less say that all our actions are represented as thoughts. And
Really.
so, if you want to initiate an action, you start with the thought.
Mm-hmm.
So if we've got these habitual ways of acting, it's because they're connected to habitual ways of thinking. So
Yeah.
the thought comes up to do something, and then you're going to get the entire habit that's connected with it. So the
Yeah.
thought is connected with all of the, neuromuscular response that goes along with it. So initially, you're working on inhibiting the thought.
Yes.
So Alexander used the term end gaining
Yeah.
to highlight this idea that generally speaking, we're really focused on the end of the action.
Hmm.
So how do we, how do we initiate any movement? And this is a fascinating question in its own right. We don't think about this much. We move around and we think we're pretty conscious of what we're doing, but very few people stop to think, where does the action actually start,
Hmm.
and how does it start?
Hmm.
But we go back to William James and before, William James thought that all actions were simply images of a particular act.
Yes.
So you've got an image of what the act looks like or what the end result is.
Hmm.
And if you want to bring about that action, you bring up that image first. So you bring up the image and then you let it unfold from there. And I
Oh,
think we do that. We do that with any conscious awareness of that's what's happening.
yeah.
So, and this is common in contemporary motor control theorizing as well. It's the idea that actions are represented in terms of their sensory consequences, particularly in terms of their action effects. So,
Mm,
if we want to bring about a change in the position of this bottle from one location to another, we
mm,
think of the action effect, which is the bottle's going to be in a different location,
yeah.
and then that primes the system to work. So
Yeah.
yeah, if we want to change these habitual actions, we start by changing the thought. Well, we start by inhibiting that thought that's going to lead to that desired end that we're
Mhm.
after. So Alexander pushed hard on this idea that we got to get away from end gaining,
Mhm.
just going directly for the end, and we got to think of the means by which we get to the end. And this is where the inhibition and the direction come in. So, the
Mm.
means are really inhibiting and directing, in particular, that relationship between head, neck, and back that's so crucial as an organizing principle in movement.